and welcome to Monte Carlo to Marlow.
Welcome, Amy, to Monte Carlo to Marlow. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. I'm going to go back to when we first met, actually, which you've just reminded me was actually for the London Rugby Sevens, and you were working for the RFU. And you've also reminded me, remember that session, I had to go and work out with the rugby team on the
England
ground.
Sevens team. I know, what a memory in an empty Twickenham stadium.
Walking out, though, you really kindly let me bring my dad because there was no way I could go to Twickenham Stadium without bringing my dad. And the guys were lovely, the London Sevens team. And walking through the tunnel that I'd watched so many times and been, because we used to go to rugby as kids and my dad's got debentures there. What a moment to just walk out and see the ground. It was amazing.
I think that's it, because you always think of Twickenham Stadium kind of full of people. So actually to have the opportunity to get behind the scenes and, do you remember we went into the gym first of all?
Yeah.
So we got to kind of, see behind the scenes, see the gym. The players took us through, kind of the way that they use the equipment in there and what their training day looks like. And then, I remember walking out into kind of through the tunnel into that empty stadium. And it's amazing. It was another one actually. And I think that's the sort of throughout my career, it's been peppered with these sort of pinch me moments. And that was definitely one of those. And I remember your dad so fondly, he was so thrilled to be there.
Oh my God, he was in his element. And, what a special day. I was the one trying to hold it together, working out with, I think I was the only girl in the journalists group.
Yeah, I think you were, because there was a sort of influencer session before, and there were a couple of sort of female PT focused influencers there. And then on the press side, from memory, I think you were. Actually, no, there was one other woman there, Lauren.
Okay.
But you were the
felt
only.
like I was the eldest and not as fit as everyone else. And I was my pride made me do all the workouts. But oh my God, working out.
You had to do the bleep test.
Professional. Oh my God, the bleep test.
I remember doing the bleep test with two of the England Sevens team.
Not easy.
I didn't have to do it. I could just stand back and watch.
I know, but you're right though. When you've been on the sort of like the PR side of things and I've been on the press side of things, so many pinch me moments. It's actually, I look back now and I think, gosh, I've had so many amazing experiences. And, I see the influencers the way they are now and, that things just seem to be getting grander and grander. But I don't know if they really appreciate it because there's a different kind of sort of sense of entitlement now with an influencer. Kind of the way that press and PR and, the whole way that the market has changed. But let's go back to how you first started working in PR. You were your first two jobs were with Exposure and Freud's, which must have been the highest profile PR companies at that time. When you were studying, were you studying to go into communications, and how did you get jobs at such big agencies?
When I was at university, so I went to the UEA in Norwich and I studied philosophy and sociology. And I had in my mind that I was going to go down one of two routes, either a journalist or a PR. And I think, the two, as we've just sort of touched on, the two are so kind of closely intertwined. And it's such a sort of a 20-year-old's view, but I steered myself towards PR because I thought it was just full of great parties. As somebody who loves parties, that's why I ended up going in that direction, because I thought, I love socializing, I love going out, and I feel that I'm a real people person. So PR felt like it would be a really, really good fit for me. So I was really proactive, kind of during those university years, wrote to different organizations and different agencies, and I did work experience in sort of various different placements that I think really, really helped me on my way to sort of having a foot in the door, firstly with Exposure. So I was working for a sort of fairly short stint at Ascot Racecourse in their press office function. I'd finished university, I'd gone travelling. I landed a job at Ascot sort of in the press office for when I came back from travelling. So I'd sort of landed on my feet. when I was at Ascot, I knew that I wanted to go into that PR agency world, and I knew that my contract was finishing at a certain period of time. So I used to read PR Week religiously. Every single week, I would read PR Week, and I would circle the agencies that were really of interest, and I would look at, what they'd been up to. And then I picked out 2 or 3 of them and I wrote to them. And my number one agency was Exposure. And I wrote to them and I talked about some of the things that I'd seen that they'd been up to in PR Week. And I talked about the work experience that I'd gone out and done. And I got an interview. And then 3 interviews later, I got the job. And it always makes me laugh because I turned up to these interviews wearing like a pinstripe suit because, you're in your
Cute.
20s and you've been told, you go to an interview and you dress up smart. And of course, you'll know Exposure. It's like the coolest place in the world. Everyone's wearing kind of the latest fashion and the coolest Converse. And I remember I'd had 2 interviews, and the woman who ended up being my boss, Vic, she called me just before the 3rd interview and she said, look, for the next interview, wear whatever you like.
Oh.
Wear whatever you're comfortable.
But you know what? First impressions and all that. If I'm interviewing someone and they turn up looking smart, that's a tick straight away.
Yeah. Well, that's it. So I did 2 interviews kind of dressed like that. And then I think, my 3rd interview, I came in a pair of jeans, and that's where it started. And I mean, it was just incredible, kind of talking about those pinch me moments, for Exposure. I was working with such high profile clients and with this wonderful team, just doing brilliant things. But I mean, man, we really delivered. It was, and the media was such a different world to what it is now. I remember.
What year are we talking about when you were in
This
Exposure?
must have been around 2005, I think it was, around 2005. Where, giving away my age here. And
We're not
I mean,
giving any age away.
it was literally, we would be on the, I remember my first kind of week, and my boss said, you need to get on the phone to journalists. And I was working on a really well-known car brand. You need to get on the phone to these journalists, but we don't want the car in. We're not interested in kind of the motoring. Our remit is not motoring. We want the car on fashion pages. So I'd be calling up fashion editors, to kind of pitch the fashiony elements of this car. And it was terrifying, but I think it absolutely helped me cut my teeth in terms of how do you kind of spin a story? What are these journalists looking for? How are you going to make your client relevant? And, I was told never, ever get on the phone to a journalist unless you absolutely know the magazine inside out, what they're writing about inside out. And that is advice that I think holds absolutely kind of true to this day, and I will always say to kind of my team now, we shouldn't be talking to journalists unless we know, that our brand or our story really, really fits with them. Because I think in this day and age, that's what, yeah. So I think that training, however terrifying it was the absolute kind of, that it was the win in terms of, really cutting my teeth in the world of PR. But I think that being said, kind of, Exposure was like a family. And funnily enough, I'm still in touch with the founders to this day. They still support me, guide me. I had lunch with one of the founders not that long ago. It was the most incredible place to start, and I went through there was sort of a tough time in my life when I was at Exposure, and, we lost a sort of close family friend. And Exposure they kind of held me so close. And, I remember I was, a senior account exec, I think, at this time. And they bought me a voucher for, a massage at the LMS Spa in Mayfair. And it was just, they didn't need to do that. And it made such a kind of difference to the way that my career started. And like I say, I look back so fondly. I hold that agency so dear to my heart, to this day. And they've obviously gone on to kind of even bigger and more brilliant things. And they're a lot bigger than they were, back at the time that sort of I was there. And then really the reason that I moved on was because I was sort of quite targeted in wanting to ensure that my CV was really rounded. So I'd been at Exposure for probably 4 or 5 years, and I just thought I need to go and get some experience in a bigger, perhaps sort of more publicist focused agency. And then I proactively went to Freud's And I sort of approached them and said, look, I'm looking to move and would love to come in for a chat. And then, one thing led to another, and I accepted a job at Freud's. And it was the hardest decision. I cried when I handed my
I
notice
bet
in.
that was really hard to leave. I mean, God, you were so focused at such a young age.
Yeah,
To
yeah. And I
know
did.
that, okay, now I need to do this because, it would be really easy for you to just stay at exposure and have a very comfortable, obviously, challenges in the type of work that you were doing. But that's really, you obviously had your CV definitely in mind.
Yeah, yeah, I did. And, I cried when I handed my notice in, and they wouldn't accept my notice immediately. They said,
But they didn't want you to go.
"Women, got to sleep on it. And, if you still feel the same." But I sort of stuck to my guns and I went to Freud's, and I had 2, 3 years of really, really great experience there as well. It totally different agency, totally sort of different experience. There I was working on much more, when I say corporate clients, I've always been kind of consumer focused, sort of on the consumer PR side, but, really kind of big blue chip brands, kind of big
What kind of
players in the
people?
world of FMCG. So I was working on brands like, we worked on the London 2012 Olympics. We worked on Carphone Warehouse, on Russian Standard Vodka, on Selfridges. So it was absolutely brilliant. And then sort of to the side, so not in my direct team, but Freud's, as you know, have got a massive kind of publicist department. So they were handling, kind of the BFI, the British Film Institute, kind of the London Film Festival. So in my sort of spare time, I would then go and work the red carpets, on sort of film premieres. And again, it was just that managing talent, managing kind of press on a red carpet situation. So it was just a whole different experience.
You've really, it's why I wanted to talk to you because you said, "Oh, I don't know what I can talk about." I was like, you have done so many different things. And it's all so valuable because, the end goal, I don't know if it was when you were sort of so young, but I don't know if you wanted to start your own business eventually, but look at all the experience that, you've absorbed in this time.
Yeah, and I think you're right that I was definitely really focused. And it's hilarious because obviously now I do own my own PR agency, Neon, and that was never my intention. And actually, after I'd had my kind of years at exposure and Freud's, brilliant as they were, I said, I'm not going to work in an agency anymore. I'm going to go in the house. And I think the bit that I not struggled with, but it was just so all consuming, was when you're juggling multiple clients. And again, this is something that you kind of know only too well. When you're juggling multiple clients, I found that the headspace, it was very hard. I was kind of getting surface level in lots of different brands, but I didn't feel that I was really, really kind of under the skin of any of them. And that's where I wanted to focus. And then this is where I made what seems to kind of many a complete kind of not U-turn, because it was still in the world of PR, but I had always loved horses. Growing up, I was really fortunate and I had my own horse growing up, and it was my happy place. Kind of other people would go to the gym or go for a run or whatever. I would be off on my horse. I'd just go out into the countryside by myself, and I could be alone with my thoughts. And it was really like my kind of escapism, I guess. And then I was, living in London, and actually that part of my world was really separated. And it was by complete chance that I was reading The Guardian, and I saw an advert for a kind of then PR manager working for the British Horse Racing Authority in London. And it was really interesting because horse racing, obviously one of the country's most traditional sports, but they were really, really looking to kind of broaden their demographic. So I sort of thought, well, you know what? That's what I do for other clients. I kind of broaden their engagement and their audience and find ways to kind of talk about their stories in ways that will resonate with their kind of potential customers. I could do that for horse racing. So I sort of chucked my hat in the ring thinking I'm not going to get anywhere in this process. And I did. I ended up getting the job, and it was just nuts because, I went from working in Freud's, where I was there every day in jeans and trainers and there's music pumping and, parties every weekend, to suddenly back in that pinstripe suit, walking into kind of board.
Like a corporate kind of world. But I guess,
Yeah.
the time then, digital was starting to emerge, wasn't it? It wasn't just
Yeah.
print. And
Yeah.
so for someone like the British Horse Racing Authority, they must have, God, they must have been clapping their hands when you walked through the door, because to have the experience of so many different types of press and working digitally, they wouldn't have been able to do that without getting someone with your kind of experience.
I think that was it. And I think, being kind of transparent, I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying this. I think they'd had their years of working with people or appointing people who were already in the industry, and they wanted people who could see and could tell them what was going on outside of the industry, because that, the kind of new audience where, they had an aging demographic, they needed to engage that kind of younger customer. And I came in with lots of ideas. One of the first things that I did when I joined, so Walker's had been a client of mine, Walker's Crisps had been a client of mine at Freud's. And one of the first things I did was establish this big on-pack partnership with Walker's, where we did
Amazing.
a huge 2-for-1 tickets, I think, so, but literally on the packet of Walker's Crisps was horse racing. And, so they suddenly had this kind of mass opportunity to speak to a different audience that they hadn't really had before. Yes, it was really corporate and really different to any environment I'd been used to working in, but it was equally brilliant. And what I will say, horse racing is such an interesting sport. I don't have much to do with the kind of sport on a kind of professional sense now. But what I will say is the people that you meet are incredible, because I think everyone thinks of horse racing and you think of the ascots and the people in their glamorous outfits with, it seems like lots of money, but actually horse racing is hundreds of thousands of people like you and I and our next door neighbour who just love horses.
And people that love to go to the races. It's never been my thing, but I do know people that absolutely love it.
Yeah, this is it. And it's, it wouldn't, the lifeblood of the sport are the people who you don't really see, the people, kind of working every hour behind the scenes of the stables, or, the men that are staying up, or the men and women that are staying up all night when a horse is in foal on a stud farm. It's that bit. And within my, my day job, sometimes I'd be out spending days with trainers. It was a magic time and a sort of really interesting time. And, I was able to build a team. We won amazing awards. I think we won the PR Week award for kind of the best consumer campaign 3 consecutive years. So we were sort of doing stuff, that they just hadn't done before. And it was really, really rewarding. But again, I kind of, with that sort of laser focus in my mind.
I just keep thinking of all these people that you've done this amazing work for, and then you suddenly going, oh, by the way, can we have a conversation? I'm going to be leaving, and them just feeling devastated. Like, oh no, Amy's been so brilliant. And
that's quite awful, doesn't it? I was never, that's
like,
it. I was
right,
never
that's it,
grateful.
next.
I just sort of I would reach a point where I would think, right, okay, not I've got everything I can out of this job, but, with horse racing, I'd sort of reached a ceiling in the kind of role that I was doing. There was nowhere sort of really obvious for me to go to. So I sort of went back to that CV and thought, where don't I have that much experience? And that was where I sort of thought, I don't have that global strategic piece. And that was then what led me to working at Pernod Ricard, which was my next move. And I was in a global comms role there, sort of overseeing global comms for some of their gin and whiskey brands. And, for kind of listeners out there, Pernod Ricard is a luxury drinks company. It's the world's leading luxury drinks company. They own amazing brands, from sort of Ballantyne, Chivas Regal, Royal Salute. And I was working on some specific sort of gin and whiskey brands, but again, in such a different remit. So where my focus in my career to date had always been on UK PR, now it was about global comms. And actually, I was working really closely with kind of markets all around the world, countries all around the world, to create PR campaigns that could be rolled out in their countries. So it was coming up with that kind of central PR idea that could work in multiple countries. And it was so like just such an interesting time. Again, Pernod was incredible, an incredible place to work, incredible people. My then boss is very much still a kind of mentor figurehead to me now. She's one of the most remarkable women I've ever worked with, total inspiration. And actually the business, the organization was full of people like that. They were brilliant. Everybody was brilliant in their individual fields. So I just, from a learning perspective, it was incredible because I learned so much from the people around me. We were working with remarkable agencies, and I got to travel, which was a huge passion. And
Talk about some of the countries and the way that they worked really differently in PR, because that must have been such an eye opener. What were
yeah,
the differences in the kind of places that you were traveling to?
it was remarkable, and I think probably made even more interesting by the fact that it was an alcohol brand. So actually, or kind of alcohol brands, because actually just the cultural nuances in the difference in the way that people consume alcohol is huge. So a brand like Ballantine's, for example, which was my kind of baby at Pernod. Absolutely love Ballantine's. It's really interesting because if you go to Europe, and Ballantine's is huge in Europe, so in countries like Spain and France, it has a huge kind of market, whereas actually it doesn't really activate in the UK. So it's interesting because some people in the UK know Ballantine's, but it's not as huge. Whereas if you go to Asia or kind of other European countries, absolutely huge. But the way that they consume the product is totally different. So your PR campaigns, therefore, are totally different. So in Europe, they're drinking whiskey on a night out. They drink it like we would do vodka, or kind of once upon a time, like we might have done with vodka. So they're drinking, kind of whiskey and Coke on a night out. That's kind of their drink of choice, which we don't see so much here in the UK. So actually, for Valentine's, the campaigns that we would do would be generally focused on kind of that entertainment world. So we would do lots of activation in the world of music. We work with people like Pete Tong. We worked with a really cool skateboarder, because it was all about creating these campaigns that kind of really resonated with that cultural movement that was kind of happening in Europe. Just before I sort of left Pernod, we established a huge partnership with Boiler Room that goes on to this day. So again, kind of really aligning Ballantine's with that kind of music and entertainment world that really got that kind of younger, kind of audience that were consuming Ballantine's when they're out and about. Whereas if you go to Asia, it's all about, kind of affluence and drinking this really expensive whiskey. Yeah. So what they do, and it's really interesting because they tend to buy a really expensive bottle of whiskey, and then it would stay in the bar, and it would have their name tag on it, and then they would return. So actually, if you're taking a client out, you would go into the bar with your client, and then you would ask for your personal bottle of very expensive whiskey, and you would drink from that bottle. And then maybe there'd be some left, maybe there wouldn't, depending on the night. The bottle would go back on the shelf with your name on it, and you could come in and enjoy it with your next client. And that's how they kind of consume their whiskey. So again, from a kind of Valentine's perspective there, that was all around the world of golf. So we were kind of doing loads of activations in the world of golf. And again, we'd be out in South Korea or in China, kind of working on different golf events. And it would be my role to look at sponsorships that we had in place and how we could really amplify the sponsorships. We might be working with certain golfers. So could we create beautiful kind of visual content? Could we invite markets to submit kind of questions to these golfers that we can then answer? So they've all got kind of personalized content to use for the purpose of PR in their market. We established the world's first virtual golf club. So again, yeah, which was kind of the first one. I mean, there were a few iterations, but the very first one so Ian Poulter was the club captain. So we went out to Miami to go and create some content with Ian, and for him to kind of talk about his journey and kind of what this golf club meant to him. And that was kind of a way of bringing the world's kind of global golf community together, for this shared love of golf, but obviously that was enabled by Ballantine's. So it was a really, really interesting time of my life. And I think, God, before kids, it was a dream
You were
job.
busy, Amy. You were busy.
It was a dream job, just like I say, for a kind of travel lover. And that's probably my kind of number one passion. It was just, yeah, absolute dream.
So you had a baby. You obviously, you love work. You're passionate about work. I'm sure you were kind of, as much as it was lovely to have that time, you were keen to get back into working, and you started work for the wireless group. So again, another aspect of communication done before.
Exactly. So I went to Wireless Group, who own TalkSport and Virgin Radio, Talk Radio, etc. So I went in-house as their communications director, and I was partly motivated by the fact that because I had children now, I couldn't do the travel, and this was a UK kind of focused job, but with really exciting, opportunities. They just won the license to relaunch Virgin Radio, which wasn't on the air at the moment. So it was a really, really exciting brief and an exciting time to kind of bring back to air a really kind of loved radio proposition, that at the time was going to have Edith Bowman on the breakfast show, and, some really exciting kind of presenters, as well as to kind of really play, I was on their leadership team. So my kind of I got a lot in terms of kind of corporate experience there. And again, a hugely interesting time because Wireless was being acquired by News International. They're now kind of part of the News UK portfolio. So I was able to kind of oversee that acquisition process from a corporate comms perspective. So sort of liaising with business journalists and again, just honing that kind of part of my CV that I didn't have experience in. So a great learning curve while coupling with some really exciting, kind of consumer activity. We were working really closely with the Virgin team, and we were fortunate enough to have some brilliant access to Richard Branson for events and for interviews, while also doing things like, we kitted out a whole Virgin train, kind of turned it into a moving music studio that kind of went from Manchester to London with bands like Travis on board and, kind of performing live and broadcasting live from the train, which obviously delivered, kind of huge benefits in terms of sort of PR and really letting people know that Virgin Radio was back. So I think that sort of really paved the way for the station as it's known today. And, obviously it's gone on to even bigger and better things, with kind of top tier presenters and producers involved.
Were you there when Chris Evans came back, or had you left by then?
No, I'd moved on before. And this was it, really. I moved out of London. I was, commuting kind of back in full time. This was pre-pandemic, so there was no flexibility at all, just none. You're kind of in an office 5 days a week or not at all. And I didn't want to do it anymore. So I handed in my notice there, thought I would find another job or look for another job working for a consumer brand, but it really was just changing one situation for the same somewhere else. And that was when I went solo and kind of thought, I'll set up Neon, I'll go it alone. And I don't really know what that looks like. Maybe it'll last 6 months, maybe a year, maybe longer. And now 10 years on, nearly 10 years on.
Years, gosh, I can actually, wow, that is amazing. And so setting up on your own, obviously it's kind of daunting, but then you've got such an amazing amount of experience. You've worked with so many different clients. You've obviously got great relationships with press and journalists. But what did you think was going to be because you've always kind of gravitated towards sort of health and wellness and sport. Who was your first client, and how did that happen? Sort of going after a client and saying, right, I'm on my own.
Yeah.
How was that process?
My first client, and it's so funny because I think the business has it's been such an evolution. So when I first started, I was sort of kind of, I just need to have a client. And, actually the first person that I told was my previous boss at British Racing, absolutely brilliant kind of mentor and figurehead. I told him that I was going to set up on my own, and he immediately said, we'll come with you as a founding client. We'll give us a couple of days a week. And, that's kind of where it started. So I was really fortunate because this was a couple of months before I kind of was officially starting. And so I had a kind of client from the very beginning. And then it has always been about network. And actually going back to that kind of rugby conversation, the reason that I ended up working with the RFU through Neon was actually a former colleague of mine from British Racing, funnily enough, had moved to the RFU. So when they needed PR support and she knew that I'd set up on my own, she said, can you come and have a chat? And that's where that kind of came from. So from the off, I started off and I had British Horse Racing and the RFU
Amazing
as sort of
client.
clients, which was just incredible. And, back then it was sort of just me. I was more of a kind of independent consultant than an agency. And really it just grew from there. And that's when I started to think, okay, I really want to focus on an area that I love, which is that kind of health, wellness, fitness component. We are a sort of lifestyle agency, and we have brilliant lifestyle clients that have allowed me to dabble in areas such as drinks, the world of drinks. So I wouldn't say we're entirely kind of focused, but that is absolutely our area of expertise. now we've got a lovely team, and we are really fortunate to work with, some of the kind of the greatest brands in their respective space, from kind of the leading yoga studio to one of the world's leading supplement brands to the number one kombucha brand. It has just been such an incredible journey, and touch wood, so far everything has come from recommendation. So we actually haven't had to do new business. I've been able to build a team, and I would say that we love working with kind of what I would describe them as kind of purpose-led challenger brands. So the brands that we tend to work with, they have a purpose, they have a kind of mission, and they're kind of out there to challenge the kind of status quo. And that's what we love. So they're sort of pioneers in their space, but they're still small enough to be kind of agile and nimble and to be open to kind of new ideas. And that is where we come into our own, because I would say that our absolute forte is really getting under the skin of a brand and looking at what stories they already have to tell and how we can best tell them in the media. And I think that gives us a really kind of great opportunity to really create cut through for them, but without having to constantly go cap in hand to say, we need budget for this and we need budget for that, which is, I think, some agencies, they're fortunate they work with brands that have huge amounts of budget. But I think that often means that you perhaps are a little less creative because you could almost buy those ideas.
I think in a conversation we had before is that we were talking about how the way that print and digital has changed, and there's not that much budget that goes into sort of journalism, unfortunately, at the moment. But if you can provide a really good story, it's well written, the brand really well, and you're presenting that to a journalist, you've got so much more chance of them printing it because of your experience and the kind of brands that you're working with. You're able to do that. You're not just sending out press releases, weekly press releases. There's so much that comes with the experience of what you've created and the team that you've got around you, that brands are really lucky to be working with people that have got that kind of knowledge.
100%. And that's where we're all senior within Neon, and that is sort of our USP. I think that clients perhaps don't need as much of our time as they might do a more junior person, because we've got the network, we know how it works, we know how to kind of really, really kind of create a story. And it's interesting, I don't envy kind of young people starting in the world of PR now. I think it's a really tough game.
How do you get into it? Do you take on internships in your company? I know it's quite hard.
Yeah, we haven't, but that's not to say that we wouldn't. I think kind of mostly, we're all completely remote. So I think the reality would be, could we create an internship that was actually really, really kind of going to give someone, that great fun experience that, you
It's
could
different
get.
if you don't have an office, isn't it? I
Yeah,
used to have American students come and work on Beauty in the Dirt, and I loved having them, and they got so much out of it because, okay, well, you can go to a press event, you can go to a free movie screening, and they loved it because they were almost like a beauty editor or a fashion editor for 3
yeah,
months. It was such a great experience for them. There's so many work from home people now. The
100.
internships, I'm sure, are falling away a little bit, and it's such
Yeah,
brilliant
yeah.
to learn.
This is it. And that whole kind of working from home dynamic, don't get me wrong, for us, it works incredibly because, actually the women on my team at Neon, the kind of flexibility that brings, it allows you to have that top-notch talent that you are missing out on, because there are so many people, women in particular, who need that flexible working approach, and actually more and more men as well. And I think if you can't offer them that flexibility, you're missing out on some really, really incredible who I have found are so loyal because they are so happy. That being said, I think if you're someone at the beginning of your kind of career, and to my point about working in exposure and frauds, I think so much of my experience was gained from the people that were around me, just watching how they operate in that office space. And I think, that's where I'm not entirely supportive for kind of bigger agencies or younger people to be entirely remote. I think you miss out on too much. And I think if you can kind of create a bit of a hybrid model, but it's got to be a bit of a case by case process. Even if you went back 1-2 years ago, I think people were starting to kind of have those, is PR still kind of needed? Is it still we're seeing all the influencers, and some of the influencers have got bigger followings than, some of the print publications now. And of course, there's an absolute role for influencers for sure. So I'm not, kind of knocking that. They play totally different roles. The loyalty that can be kind of gained from a publication, whether it's print, whether it's online, is something that I think very few influencers can really, really command. The kind of trust and credibility that comes from a journalist actually endorsing your brand, your product, your person, that is worth its absolute weight in gold.
Yeah, and brands still, as much as, figures are dwindling when you see them, so many brands just want to see themselves in print. There's still
Mm.
something said for that, opening up the Sunday Times style or the supplements and seeing yourself in print.
I still get that buzz. I get that buzz. If I open a magazine and my client is in there, that is my day made. And I think also there is a huge opportunity for PR now with AI. And it is going to make such a difference because obviously everyone is using AI now. And those AI responses are based on them scanning the web. And the answers that they're pulling through are based on the content that they're finding in the higher ranking publications, and there's a recency bias. So from a PR perspective, if you are generating your client publicity through, the magazine websites that are out there and you're doing it consistently and you're doing it well, those clients are going to be the ones that shine through in those AI generated responses. So I think for people that were questioning the kind of worth of PR, now there is absolutely no argument.
But when I had Handpicked Media, I represented bloggers, and it was about updating your site, looking at Google Analytics and how many page impressions you got. And then, over the years, people were like, I'm not updating my blog. I'm just putting something on social media. And this little square photo was going to be worth more than doing an actual researched article on your blog. I always said, if you want the search and you want some longevity, put the effort into the website.
Yeah.
And you just said that it's coming back round, isn't it?
100%. And we're already now seeing, retailers kind of getting in on that and retailers partnering with AI so that eventually, we're going to start seeing AI giving us specific brand and product recommendations and links to purchase and all of these sorts of things. So I think, you're absolutely right that it has come back around, and that is brilliant for PR because I think, kind of potentially people who are out there on the fence and perhaps saying, well, look, we invest in influencer, so we kind of got, the engagement piece figured. Well, that's not going to help you now when it comes to kind of really ensuring that you play a part in the kind of AI generated search.
People would think, oh, I don't need a PR because I can just write my press release in ChatGPT. But that's not going to work.
God, we see that. That's it. I've seen, every now and again, I'll come across something and I'm just like, that's so clearly
You
generated.
know where that's from. Yeah.
That's
You know
it.
where.
Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, bit of lazy work. It serves a purpose. It can finesse things and, kind of speed up processes and what have you. It should never ever be the end result, if you're kind of doing your job properly. And but I think to your point about where someone starts in the world of PR, I do still think that there is that, building your network, getting out there to try to get that experience. Those things I don't think have changed. You've just got to be kind of targeted and clear, in your approach. Don't just send a blanket letter to everybody. Personalize it. Why that person? Why that agency? Why that journalist? These things, they've stood the test of time, and they stand the test of time, I think, to this day.
You are such an inspiration for people to take that advice and know how well it served you. Thanks so much, Amy. What a career. And you're 10 years into Neon. You've got a great team. Your team's growing. Anything new on the horizon you can tell us about, or just carrying on as you are?
Yeah, exactly. I think it is. I think it is. We have got a couple of really, really exciting new clients that we'll be announcing soon. One sort of in the kind of youth mental health space, actually, which I think will be just such an exciting brand and a real kind of conversation starter. But beyond that, I always sort of, when the team and I talk about our sort of ambition and what we want to do, we always say we're a really nice collective of people and we want to work with really nice
Nice
brands.
people. Yeah.
Nice brands, nice people. It's a lifestyle business, and ultimately we want to work with people that kind of really that we vibe off of, and that's we've been lucky enough to kind of manage that today, and long may that continue.
Long may that rain. Thanks so
Yeah,
much, Amy.
Krista, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it.
Thank you.